I know they don't want to leave, right? You can come back. You can come back. Such a treat today. We're looking forward to this. And I know those who've been working with them have been looking forward to this even more, but we have all been looking forward to this. When Richard Jensen was younger, his father used to have a conversation with him in which he would say, I want you to remember who you are, Dick. And he said, you have a family name to live up to. He didn't get this speech that often, but he did get this speech at times in his life that were sort of poignant times. His first date, when he went out with the car for the first time and took the family car, or when he left home for the first time. He would get that speech, remember who you are. His dad believed, and I think rightfully so, that he and his mom had instilled in Richard these values that would last him a lifetime if he followed them. And all of us have those values. And we pass on values as we rear our children, whether we like to or not, for better or for worse, we pass on values. But when Richard went out on his own, he was expected to live up to those better values. You have a family name, his father would say, to live up to. In theological circles, of course, we complicate everything, but we use larger words than that. We say that the imperative to action grows out of the indicative. Now, let me explain that. The imperative for Richard was to remember, and the indicative was the fact that he was a Jensen. So he is to remember who he was, who he is. He has to be who he is. Be who you are, right? That's all we really should have to tell our children. It's another way of putting it. And Richard's father said the imperative called him to be who he was. Now, the kind of language that Richard's father uses is precisely the kind of language that Jesus uses in today's gospel. Now, this reading is a continuance or an extension and a clarification of the passage we read last week. You remember that passage where we talked about being a part of the vine and that we were the branches and that we were connected to the vine and that by our fruit they were to identify the vine. And so we are an extension. It is an indicative that makes an imperative, right? We are to live as though we are connected to the vine. So it's just another way of saying this, but instead of using this figurative language, Jesus uses different words. More clearly, he is expounding and explaining to his followers what he really means by this. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. Those were the opening words of this reading. And then we are told that if we keep Christ's commandments, we will abide in his love. Here is Christ's imperative to us. We are to keep his commandments. That's the imperative. It is the imperative that grows out of an indicative. The indicative is that we are loved by God. So we are loved by God, so we keep commandments. This is who we are. This is what Jesus calls us to be. Be who you are. You are loved. Follow the commandments. Remember who you are, Dick. We remember what Jensen's father said. Remember who you are is what we're hearing. You are loved by God. You have God's family name to live up to. There was a new family that moved into a neighborhood, and one of the neighborhood boys saw the boy of the family outside and thought he would take the opportunity to get to know him. They had learned the family's name. They had lived there for quite a while, and so he knew who this boy was, but he hadn't really met him or integrated him into the neighborhood. And so he yelled out to him and he said, "Hey, Tony, how you doing?" And the boy looked in his direction, but really didn't respond, just kind of looked at him as though he didn't really hear what he said. And so he began to walk toward him, and he said, "Hey, Tony, what's the matter? You deaf?" He wasn't trying to be smart aleck. He was just trying to be casual and sort of, open up to him. And he walked up to the boy, and the boy says, "My name is Antonio." And he said, "Antonio, Tony, what's the difference?" And Antonio came with his family from the Rio Grande Valley. They used to live in Mexico. And then they became citizens of the United States. But they kept a lot of the customs, of course, under which they lived in Mexico, including one very important custom that had to do with names, the importance of names. And so Antonio started to explain to this young boy, I was named after my grandfather, and he was named for St. Anthony, who's a great saint of the church. So this boy whom he's telling this to doesn't really understand that. He's like, so? And he has to explain it further. And he says, well, my grandfather was a very wonderful man. He lived with us for many years. He taught me many good things. He died last year. And so I try to keep his memory and remembering that my name, Antonio, is the same as his name. Well, the young guy still didn't get it. He wasn't satisfied. And he said, but in this neighborhood, we all have nicknames. I mean, they call me Joe. My name's Joseph. And half the nicknames don't even have anything that sounds like their actual names. So Antonio shrugged and said, that's fine if you want to do those things, but I like my real name. And so Antonio is the name he wanted to go by, but this other boy was like, Antonio, it sounds stiff. Why don't you just let me call you Tony? Antonio didn't want to antagonize him, and he didn't want to ruin his chances of, getting in with a neighborhood. So he was cautious, but he told him, I don't think I want a nickname for myself. It doesn't have the same meaning for me. And the other boy said, what does Antonio mean to you? And so he carefully chose his words, searching for the words. Actually, he said, I guess it reminds me of someone who was very close to me, who meant a lot to my family and to me. And I'll always remember my grandfather as Antonio. And the other boy shrugged his shoulders and said, welcome to the neighborhood, Antonio. It's very important that we remember and grasp this reality very clearly. It would be so easy for us to turn this verse upside down. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, is what Jesus says. We would turn these on their heads if we interpreted that to mean that God will love us if we keep God's commandments. That's upside down. That's not what God said. That would be like Richard Jensen's dad saying to him, if you play the part of a Jensen, then you can be a part of the family. That's not what he said. He said, you are a Jensen. Live like one. Act like one. So God says, you are loved by God. So live like a person who is loved by God by keeping the commandments. It's what we do out of our identity. Jesus uses other figures of speech. In this same passage, I have called you friends, Jesus said. This is the indicative. This is who we are. We are friends of God. So how do we live out the imperative? By being friends, by befriending others on behalf of God. Those who need friends, right? Which includes everybody. Jesus calls us also chosen ones. You did not choose me. I chose you. I appointed you to go and bear fruit. We are chosen people. That's the indicative. And so we live out of that. That's who we are. So be who you are. Be chosen people who are supposed to live out fruit bearing in their lives. He puts the matter even more plainly in verse 12. Love one another as I have loved you. You are loved people. That's the indicative. It's who you are. So be who you are. Loved people, they love. That's what they do. If you're loved, then you're supposed to love. The Father loved Jesus. Jesus loves you. We love each other. Loved people love. It's who we are. Loving one another is really finally what this passage is all about. Jesus says the greatest commandment is that you love your neighbor, right? To that, the ruler, if you remember that passage, asked, well, who's my neighbor? And the answer was kind of confusing to us, but it basically said everyone. We have neighbors everywhere Who is my neighbor? We are called upon to love both our nearest neighbors and our farthest neighbors. Well, who is your nearest neighbor? Now think closer, because you're probably thinking about the guy down the street, right? Or next door neighbor in the house next door. Your nearest neighbor might be sitting next to you. Your nearest neighbor starts with your family members. The people who live under the same roof, the people who are with you, the people who are with you most, your mother, father, grandmother, whatever. That's your nearest neighbor. Don't exclude them. You're called to start with them. You're called to love them out of your identity, the imperative, out of the indicative that you were loved first. We start there. We don't have to go anywhere to look for extra neighbors. Start there. We love those around us. And we have folks that we pass every day. Work, school, everywhere. We pass people. We know people. We have acquaintances. We have people we know even better than that. These are also our neighbors, our near neighbors, because we have an opportunity to literally touch them, to reach out to them, to speak to them, to meet their needs. And these are folks who are within our circle of influence. The call to love one another is a call to serve those whom we meet each and every day. These people need our love and concern. They need our listening ear. They need our helping hand. They need our gifts that we bring to life. They need us to do our jobs well. What's our job? To be loved people. Right? That's who we are. If we do our jobs as loved people, then we love. So there are people who need us to do our jobs. Charity begins at home. Love for one another begins with those whom we encounter in the routines of our daily lives. Loved people love. Now, in an ideal world, that would be enough. Because if everybody loved the people that they could touch in their lives, then everybody would have someone loving them, right? And loving them back. Well, it doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, we have folks that are not our nearest neighbors, that live lives that are anything but loved. Unfortunately, in the real world, we have to reach out to our farthest neighbors as well. Love doesn't end there with our nearest neighbors. It has to be extended. Our farthest neighbors, people who don't occupy the same time, space with us, they need love too. They also need our loving concern for them. Let me give you a shocking example of our farther neighbors, right? I read again this statistic recently, and I've read it many times, but I read it again. 40% of the poverty-stricken people in the United States of America are children. 40%. 40% of our under poverty are children. Even as early as 2 decades ago, I remember Senator Patrick Moynihan. Anybody remember him, of New York? And he made this statement. He said, "This is the first nation in the history of the world where children are the segment of our society that is worst off." Think of that. In our country, we have more children that are worse off than we do adults. About 15%, 1 in every 7 child, is raised in poverty. That beats the adults by 6% in our country. That statistic has been steady for decades, and maybe that's why we've lost the ability to be shocked by it. We need to be shocked by that. In our country, that children are our poorest people in America. Poor children in America are just one example of our farthest neighbors. And I would guess that most of you in your daily routines in life probably do not spend very much time or even meet the people that are revealed in these statistics. You probably don't spend time rubbing up against those who are really a part of these numbers, these poor children. So, you don't have the opportunities, unless you make them, you don't have the opportunities to touch them, to love them as an imperative, as loved people, and to change their lives. So we have to get creative on this. They are our farthest neighbors, and yet love cannot stop with just those in your circles. So we have to find ways to extend that love beyond. We will want to do this by getting organized, by getting together with other people of goodwill who wish to tackle this problem. We may even need to get political, to vote for people who have the wisest solution to these problems. We want to be sure that our presently elected representatives are aware of these problems and are working on it. You may even want to write one of your legislators. We might spend some time volunteering, where you can rub shoulders with those who are in need and you can extend them love. There are many opportunities for you to volunteer with an agency that's attacking this problem. We might get our congregation to join other congregations to help work on these problems and these matters in our own community. There are many channels for us to be open to love one another, even expressing that love to our farthest neighbors. Our love cannot stop there. We have neighbors even further than that into the future. We have neighbors who have not yet been born, for whom we are responsible in many ways. They will inherit the air, the rivers, the streams that we either ravage or protect. Pollution is just one matter that concerns us today. It's a matter of life and breath for people yet unborn. What kind of natural world, what kind of environment shall we leave our farthest neighbors out of love for them, for our children yet unborn? Again, our individual actions cannot scratch the surface attacking this problem. The problem of industrial revolution, climate change, whatever you want to call these things, is a problem that goes beyond anything that your individual acts alone can solve. So here too, we have to get organized. We'll have to work together with people, other people of goodwill. We'll have to elect wise elected officials, and we have to seek good science. We will need better laws, state, national, local laws. We have to do that because that is what reaches our farthest neighbors, even when we cannot touch them ourselves. Loving our unborn 21st century generations and our neighbors is a call from God to love one another. Being effective agents of love to those farthest neighbors requires a good deal of imagination and effort on our part. But there can be no limit to our love. We can't stop with the immediate, those who are simply within our grasp. We can't, because it's not who we are. We are loved by the God whose love is limitless. That's our indicative. Be who you are. Love like one who has been loved by God. As the Father has loved me, so I love you. Abide in my love. It's the first verse in that reading. Loved people, that's the indicative. This is who we are. The imperative is to love people, growing out of the indicative, your identity. Love your neighbors, near, far. Loved people, love. I read some years ago about Robert Cade. He was a doctor employed in research at the University of Florida. And in 1965, he did some research on the football players there at the University of Florida and discovered that they lose a lot of weight and fluids during practices and grueling times, games, and under heavy exercise. He set out to solve this problem. He said they're losing so much fluid and weight that this isn't normal, this isn't healthy. So they began in the research lab trying to figure out something that could replenish those kind of nutrients and fluids. And they developed something, and at the advice of one of his colleagues, they named it Gatorade, of course. You remember Gatorade. We still drink it, right? We still drink it because Stokely Van Camp bought the patent and began distributing it. And they were serving $400 million worth a year of Gatorade until Van Camp was purchased by Quaker Oats in 1983. And then PepsiCo bought Quaker Oats in 2001. At that time, it was serving over 400 billion in sales worldwide. So Dr. Cade probably got a great royalty from Gatorade, right? Don't you think? Still lived in the same house in Gainesville till he died in 2007. He did not use his money for himself. He gave his money away. He spent time investing in the lives of others. He funded research that he performed on others, he and other doctors. He underwrote the education of medical students. He paid the bills of needy patients. He supported Vietnamese boat people. He spread his wealth around. When asked about this, he replied, "God has blessed me in all kinds of ways, including a big income." In the book of Deuteronomy, God tells the Israelites, a man should give as he is blessed. I think I'm duty-bound to do as he suggests. So he did. He was a man who was truly rich, but he didn't get seduced by that wealth. He understood that money and all the other blessings that we have are merely tools to do what we were called to do, to love as a part of our identity, using whatever tools, opportunities to practice the imperative of God's love. Homer and Emmylou were courting on the front porch of their home on a swing. Homer was very much in love with Emmylou, but he was shy. He didn't know how to tell Emmylou how much he loved her. So he sat on the swing and he got his courage up and he said, "You know, Emmylou, if I had 1,000 eyes, they'd all be on you. If I had 1,000 arms, they'd all be hugging you. If I had 1,000 lips, they'd all be kissing you." And Emmylou says, "Why don't you stop complaining about what you don't have and use what you do have?" Well, faith is using what we do have. Faith is the ability to see. Faith is the action we take given what we have. Faith is the move we make. Faith is the ability to see it, but also the courage to act upon it. Our imperative is to love, because our indicative is that you are loved immeasurably by God. Live like it. Let us pray. Gracious